Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the neighborhood watch for movies you might not want moving in next door. I am Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we welcome Aaron and Carlee of the film podcast Hit Factory. We'll be discussing the films of French provocateur Catherine Breillat. Breillat never met a male-female relationship she couldn't dissect in harrowing fashion, often with explicit or controversial content. We will be tackling two of her hardest-to-stomach films, 2001's pitch-black coming-of-age tale Fat Girl and 2004's graphic provocation, Anatomy of Hell. But first, I would again like to welcome Carlee and Aaron. They are the hosts of one of our favorite film podcasts, Hit Factory, about the films and politics of the 90s. Our films today were not exactly hits, nor were they made in the 90s.
They were provocations, as you said. I was wondering what they were. They were provocations.
You got it.
I was provoked. But thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much. We're really, really thrilled to be here. Happy to be talking about films that have nothing to do with our decade of focus.
I wouldn't say that they have nothing to do with our decade of
that
focus.
We're not made in our decade of focus.
Yes.
Things that we would have never covered on our program. This is something that comes up a lot, but we sometimes get asked to join podcasts and someone's like, hey, there's this 90s movie and you're the 90s movie guys. Do you want to talk about it? And we're like, well, it's kind of the thing we do on our show. We'd love to do something not in the 90s if you have any of that to go around. So thank you for asking us to do these.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled to be talking about this director, Catherine Breillat, in particular. I have wanted a forum to speak more about her films, and I also just love the premise of y'all's podcast. So I'm really happy to be here talking about these films with you.
Oh, we're happy to have you.
And just for anyone listening, you can support Hit Factory on Patreon and get premium episodes. Is that the right word?
We call them that, but
are they premium?
Yeah, well, here's the deal:
Marc is asking existential questions at this point.
Thank you, Marc, for clarifying this. We'll go ahead and give the ghost here a little bit and just say the episodes you will receive on the Patreon feed are often quite similar in format and content to those you would receive on the free feed. We generally, though, try to approach some of the bigger titles of the decade in those Patreon episodes, things that are a little bit more kind of gargantuan in like box office premise or like box office performance rather, or in terms of just like kind of cultural cachet. So if you're looking for your like Michael Mann Heat kind of films, if you're looking for your James Cameron Titanic kind of stuff, those are usually the ones that we get on the Patreon feed, hence premium.
Also, what makes them premium is we just share like a ton of like insane details about our personal lives on those episodes. So, you know, anyone who's like interested in that stuff.
All right.
I'm half kidding. Like I do end up doing that on the Patreon episode.
Yeah, I mean like once or twice there's always kind of like an aside where we're like, it's fine, it's on a Patreon episode, we can say that. Yeah.
Right. Okay, cool. Well, we're happy to give you an opportunity to kind of break format a little bit and talk about these films, which neither of us had seen either of them going into this. I had the only Breillat film that I had seen before this, and I did catch up on a couple other ones just to get in the spirit for this week. But initially, I'd only seen her most recent film last summer from last year, which I assume you probably caught up with by now.
Have not.
I have not seen it.
Okay. Well, it's a remake of, I believe, a Danish film called Queen of Hearts that I also watched, and I could immediately see like, oh, after I started watching more of her films, I was like, oh, of course she chose this movie to remake. There's in a lot of these films, there is a younger man who is pursuing or involved in a relationship somehow, a lot of times with an older woman. That's not always true. Actually, that's kind of, these two movies kind of break that. But I do want to ask if I assume that are you pretty well versed in Breillat's work in general? Because I was finding her themes to be very evergreen going through. It's almost like a career-long project of these power dynamics in sexual or romantic relationships, usually very ugly power dynamics. And so, yeah, what made you want to choose this particular filmmaker, and where are you coming from with as far as her whole filmography?
Yeah, so I have seen 3 movies of hers. So I actually haven't spent a ton of time with her filmography. I have spent a ton of time with her sort of like words and thoughts about female desire and sort of femininity and the ways that it is both sort of like political and material, um and I guess like emotionally subjective. And on top of that, I'd say like one of the reasons that I adore her and really find her films to be remarkable, and why I wanted to talk about these ones when we were discussing options, is um, she is one of the few female directors that I think never ever succumbs to, I'll say like maybe a cringeworthy phrase, but like patriarchal capitalism, either formally, narratively, aesthetically, or emotionally. And I think vehemently asserts a sort of like radically feminine perspective throughout all of her films. And I think that is a remarkable and wonderful and nourishing and productive and generative thing to do. And I also just think that it makes for beautiful art. And lastly, I'll say a lot of the things that drive my interest in film and my conversations about film and what I think makes good cinema are centered around sex and like the dynamics of desire, and our relationship to desire and sexuality as an audience, and also characters within the film, like their relationship to desire and their own sexuality and performance and all of those things. And she is deeply interested in that. And it's why I'm so drawn to her work.
All right, can I ask, what is the third film?
Romance.
Oh, okay, I just passed up on
Mm.
selecting that as one of the other ones that I watched. I know that one's notorious for a lot of unsimulated sex scenes. Am I on the right track there?
Yes, you are definitely on the right track. It is,
Okay.
it has a lot of unsimulated sex scenes, and there's also a lot of conversation um around like what constitutes simulation in the context of cinema, which I find fascinating. And Breillat has her own thoughts on that. But that film, even if you don't, sort of wade into that like philosophical territory, is just stunning. And I the first time I saw it, I had never seen anything like it, and I think I can probably say that about any film she's made, comfortably the ones that I haven't seen as well.
Mhm.
And Aaron, were these films that Carlee kind of exposed you to, or is this something that's in your wheelhouse as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess we both came to romance and to Briot at the same time, actually, as a corollary to inviting a wonderful critic and friend of the show onto our own podcast, Justine Perez Smith. And she kind of gave us a short list of some films she would like to be talking about. And Carlee was at the time working on a pretty ambitious piece that is now published in a Italian publication called Specchio Scuro about sexuality in film, and specifically the works of Verhoeven. But it just sort of kind of lined up that Justine offered romance up to us at the same time as Carlee was working on this. So it just kind of met the wavelength that one of our hosts was already on in terms of like sexuality and thoughts about depictions of desire and, female specifically, like desire and carnality and sexuality. So we watched that for the show. And I think it was something that moved Carlee a little bit more than it moved me initially. I liked it well enough to think that talking more Briot would be a really fun opportunity. And I'm glad we did, honestly, because I think these two films that we watch for the purposes of today, I like maybe even more than romance, specifically Fat Girl, but I think they're both terrific. And Anatomy of Hell even is sort of, I guess, according to Briot, kind of like a quasi sequel to romance. in a lot of ways, thematically and just sort of visually, aesthetically as well.
Yeah, early Verhoeven is something I hadn't thought about that I could see something relating to this a little bit. I was thinking of some other French filmmakers that we had covered previously on this podcast, like Chantal Akerman or Claire Denis.
Claire Denis for sure.
Yeah, and maybe especially with one of the other ones that I watched called Brief Crossing, even like Eric Romer, if he had like forgotten to take his antidepressants or something. But
Yeah.
well, let's dive in then with Fat Girl, because I think that this is probably the most well-known movie by her. I know it's on the Criterion Channel right now, and it's one that had been on my radar, which is why it was on our list, even though we hadn't seen it. And Anatomy of Hell, I mean, that's even hard to find anywhere to be able to watch. You got to get to go to some illicit means sometimes to see that movie if you're not going to get
a guy in a big dark coat.
A guy in a big,
Yes.
totally. Just exactly the type of person Breillat wants peddling her film.
Exactly. Yeah, just wearing a raincoat. Yeah. So, so Fat Girl is from 2001, and I guess just dive right in. This is kind of like a coming of age film in the darkest possible way. As far as these deals with the youngest characters of any of her movies that I've seen. And really the main characters are females here, even though there's a male who plays a large role in it. So this does stand out a little bit to me from her other films. But what is it that makes this in particular stand out to you? It sounded like, Aaron, that this is one that you had liked a little more than the other one.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to kind of question this too, right? It had me. This is the wonderful thing about Breillat, is that it has you like interrogating a lot of your own sort of like predispositions, your own feelings around the things that she's exploring. And Carlee was quick to point this out too, where when in talking about these films after we had watched them, I was like, I think Fat Girl might be my favorite. And this wasn't an accusation, but it was I think a valid point that Fat Girl is one that of the three that we've seen between it, Anatomy of Hell, and Romance, that is perhaps like aesthetically and narratively for the longest time, maybe the least antagonizing. That it like part of its power is that it kind of lulls you into a state of ease in certain parts, just to then kind of pull the rug out from underneath you, and especially as it approaches its climax, like really to land the brutality and the intensity of its final moments. So I don't know, like part of me is like I liked it more because of maybe what it was thematically exploring and just the general kind of like wavelength that was on. But then there's a part of me that's like, well, did I like it more because it felt safer to me? Question mark. I don't know. Maybe that is what it is.
Well, lull is a good word. Coerce is even to use a buzzword in the context of the film itself, even is how some of the movie feels to me. And what gets very disturbing at certain points is like you have to remind yourself what's going on, because you are taking these to talk about Chantal Akerman, like some of them are like these unbroken conversation scenes and the dialogue sequences that are just going on and on and on. And you are sort of like, either you're getting lulled into the headspace of the man in this situation who has a certain power dynamic, or the young girl who is rationalizing it in her own way, which both headspaces are not comfortable places to be in, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it's funny that this is at certain points one of the like lighter of her films, and it's really just certain moments. I'm thinking about like when the protagonist, who's not really protagonist, I don't know, the title character, I can't remember her name offhand, is swimming back and forth in her pool and like talking to the leg of a ladder and kind of practicing kissing on it and acting like it's a lover that she's competing with the leg of the dock on the other side. And that's like one of the few moments that's just kind of cute in not in a cutesy way, but just in a kind of light way. And there's some of the sister interactions too that is like is as cruel as the older sister can often be to her sister. There are moments where the tenderness comes out, which I think stand out all the more in that context.
Yeah, as an older sister to a younger sister, I can say that the interactions between the two of them like really hit home for me in a lot of ways. And I love Seth that you bring up the coercion of the film and how sort of like deceptively coercive it is. Because that's one of the things that I was really drawn to about this particular film, which I'll just go on record as saying probably of the 3 that I've seen is my least favorite, but is still like one of the best movies I've ever seen. But I just adore Romance and Anatomy of Hell so much. But I really was drawn to the manner in which Breillat sort of presents us with these images and these moments that sort of feel aesthetically and thematically tantalizing in ways that we might be sort of like more socialized to digest more easily. A beautiful young girl sort of awash in tulle and lace, like breathy and touching herself and, asking big questions of this beautiful man who is promising her all of these things. Like that is a thing that a lot of us are really comfortable seeing and used to seeing in cinema and just sort of like in societal images of men and women interacting, right? And I like that Breillat, sort of presents those things to us. And then also like injects them with a ton of brutality, both in like the words that are being spoken and the power dynamics that you can see unfolding before you, inclusive of Anaï, who is the titular character. And I think like that's just brilliant. And I also love how Breillat juxtaposes some of these, sort of more like cinematically palatable sexually beautiful images and moments with moments that are that we might as an audience find repulsive in some way, right? And then we have to sort of question like, why am I feeling repulsed by this image of this young overweight girl sort of lying on the sand like a beached whale? Like what is it about that I don't like? But then when they cut to, this sort of like Burt Lancaster moment between Elena and Fernando, like making out and having sex on the sand, like that feels it's so over the top, and that feels comfortable and familiar, right? And I think that's just like a brilliant subversive move on her part. It's a really, really special film.
Yeah, and there's really no effort to make Anaï a super relatable character. There's not like she's not her personality is also very withdrawn. There aren't a lot of common touches to like try to endear us to her in even though I think that does still happen. It's not in a typical way.
Yes.
She's not given a lot of like speeches or displays of a plucky personality or anything that
Right.
and I think just goes with the whole movie being so completely unsentimental and blunt about everything.
Yeah, what could be really easy, like yin yang thing of like, well, pretty girls are empty and don't have anything going on, and then the girl who's having a hard time, who isn't conventionally pretty, the fat girl, is deep and is to have our sympathies because of that or something. It's not necessarily that at all, which I feel like a lesser movie would do such a thing.
Yeah, both girls are have their own motivations and desires, and when we get glimpses of those things. Elena, who is the older sister who is being pursued by Fernando, the male character in this film, and also the sister between the two of them, who is favored, I would say, more by her parents. She, is not like this vapid, disgusting person. She has her own dreams and has her own feelings about love and her own fears, and we get to see those things and not necessarily find her detestable. And she admits, to Anais several times, like, I get so mad at you because, like, I love you so much, and because, like, I see myself in you, and I also feel like you're a part of me. They both sort of say something similar to that to each other. And so she's just as human, and particularly by the end of the film, when we get to the climax, I think Breillat has done a really wonderful job of opening us up to both girls and allowing us ways in to connect with both of them on their own accord and then together as a pair of sisters.
I want to say before we get to the ending, which at some point I think we have to talk about probably in detail, but up until then, I think what makes this, the reason this is on our podcast is there are some really frank and disturbing, honestly, interactions here, where especially this long centerpiece scene where Elena is being talked into having sex with her much older boyfriend. And the way that this scene plays out, and at such length, and it's with such relentless psychological battering, and you see every little technique come out from trying to shame her and make her feel bad about what she's doing, and then pulling out the love card and all these little justifications. I honestly feel like this maybe is something that young girls should watch, or that they could get something out of. And I don't know if this is the kind of movie that a lot of them would be open to. This is definitely not Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Like, I don't know, but how would you feel about letting younger people watch this for that
Right.
reason? Or would I just traumatize them?
No, I mean, like,
it's very French of you,
it's
Marc.
very French. I was just gonna say,
very
like,
French of you.
like when we were watching Anatomy of Hell too, I was just like, this just to me kind of reads as how like French people hang out. It kind of,
just
like, just like, but I do feel like Europeans and like European women specifically are exposed to kind of like the nature of like sex, and specifically the way that men interact with women at like a much earlier and in a much earlier age and in a much franker way than in the United States. Like I think that, and I don't know, like it just kind of seems like there's a sheltering that takes place, and then we talk about this in the terms of like sexual education in our country as well, where it's like children experience like sexual things well before they actually understand their significance or their meaning, and so it makes it harder for them to actually express and like communicate their boundaries in like meaningful and articulate ways, and also to like understand if something that's happening to them is like an indiscretion or something that's like actually like abusive or wrong. This is maybe like a more serious conversation than we wanted to get into, but like I think that this is a film that there are parts of, I think that maybe are too provocative for like your 5-year-old, but like I think that younger children and young women specifically can get something out of this and understand it and see the nature of how these girls are relating to the men in their lives, and specifically ones who are pursuing them sexually. And there's maybe some sort of lesson to be drawn, but at the very least something that is expressive of like an understanding to like be seen on screen in a way that's like that Breillat does really singularly. Like I don't know anyone else who communicates this kind of directly to that kind of feminine experience in this way.
I don't think it's a controversial question to ask, Marc. So as the female on the show, I absolve you of any
as our woman shield.
any potential problematic statement, because I don't think what you're asking is a problem at all. I do think there is a lot to be gained from the conversations and the lessons that are explored in this film that would be important for teenage girls to see in particular. I think what you both are talking about, just in terms of like these power dynamics and the sort of coerciveness of these exchanges between Fernando, who is Elena's much older boyfriend, it's disturbing, and it's also remarkable how just how like seamless and precise and effective these types of conversations are for men when they want something.
Mhm.
And as the viewer, I don't think we ever feel like it's being forced, in the sense that like it's never a far leap for me to see why Elena concedes to the next step. I think the film does a really good job of like establishing the stakes being laid for her and how her own sort of like internal machinations are working, so that it is believable that, you know, she ends up having sex with a man when she starts off saying like, I'm not doing that, for a long time.
Yeah, and the way it actually ends up then is also just so, you know, brutally disappointing.
And I would say like the more modern, I feel like the 2024 version of this movie would throw in a lot more to simplify everything and make this male college stud more villainous. Like cut away to him back home being like, yeah, what a bitch, you know, can't believe she's like giving it up and everything. Which, I mean, as far as what we're given, we can only imply like that anything like that is really going on. Like, I think that they're ideally this person should be more educated as to how dubious they are being, but at the same time, like what we're given, it can be believed, the interpretation that this guy is romantically inclined in some sort of way towards this girl, and maybe it's not some sort of put on, like totally, as far as that's concerned, the whole like getting the ring thing, it, but in a way like either one, we are, that's why it's a healthy, and it is like a good for a lesson in that way. It is like either one is not permissible in this situation. Even if you are doing it out of love or lust, you're you're not making the right decision, and he's not making the right decision, and it ends poorly. We see this whole like at the very least, this we are made to see that this man cannot follow through with this promise, that this big lofty promise like so many people try to give lovers in exchange just in the moment, and it's like that's the danger of those things, you know, even on that level of like the ring and all that stuff.
Yeah,
and
I think that's such a good point, Seth. I like the conceit that Fernando is maybe just like thinks that he's a good guy,
Yeah.
right? The way that a lot of guys do who do deplorable shit.
and the movie like almost kind of does at certain points imply that maybe he's, you know, deluded by his own kind of words as well, because for as like, you know, kind of alarming and brutal as that extended sequence is when he's trying to coerce Elaine into having sex, like there are also parts of it that are like almost comical and like how silly they are, where like he's laying naked to her and he's like, I can control myself, I don't have to put it in, I can just like be next to you naked. And like,
I mean, he also says the opposite at one point. He's like, how do you expect me to resist you when you
Yeah.
are rubbing up against me that
right,
way?
but like that's just it, like he's like totally contradictory in these different places, and like, you know, the stuff that he says where he's like, what, you want me to go like jerk off by myself? That's disgusting, like don't make me go do that. And you know, I mean, it also ends
or
with,
worse, go find another woman.
or go find another woman to let, I'd have
Why
to
would
go
you
find
make
another,
me do that?
yeah, why would you do that? And I mean,
They say that's sick. They say sick
yeah,
a
he's like,
lot.
that's
in
Yeah,
this
sick,
movie
that's
as
so
an
sick.
adjective,
And
which I don't know what the translation is, but yeah.
Lay sick.
he also uses like one that's very funny because it's found its way into like weird, like more kind of like modern religious conversations too, where he's like, oh, it doesn't count as sex if you like do it from behind, right? Like
Right.
if you have anal, like it doesn't actually count. But I mean, again,
it's a demonstration of love.
It's a demonstration of love, right? And it's like, like all of these things obviously are like, they're coercive and they are like, kind of dangerous, and like the part of it feels very like charged and violent. But yeah, there is a part of it too that's just like, oh, this is just like this is a socialized way of him being and existing, where he's not capable of like even understanding maybe like just how manipulative he's being.
I think one of the things that's really important about the exchanges between Fernando and Elena is that it's easy, perhaps, as an audience member to watch these conversations and this extended sequence where, he is trying to get her to have sex with him and think like, well, what the fuck, Elena? Like, handle your shit, or like, what are you doing? Like, and what I think is really key about Breillat's perspective that she asserts vehemently throughout this extended sequence, and that I think the actress playing Elena does an incredible job with, is that there is something intoxicating about hearing the ways in which you are being treated differently by a man who has treated other women poorly. What is, sort of tragic about that dynamic, outside of, the outright misogyny, is that it makes women reliant on other women's suffering in order to feel that they themselves are of value.
Which we see from the get-go in this movie, and is like at the whole thing with the two sisters, like from the get-go, there's a treatment that is going on for one that isn't happening to the other, purely because of superficial reasons. And it pits it not only like, I don't know, yeah, it pits the two of them against each other, unfortunately, because of this, like, what should be arbitrary,
Yeah, I think it's important that the film is named after the younger sister, where most of the overt action is actually happening to her, to her sister. So it is interesting that I was almost surprised that there was such, I would say, even more screen time given to the sister. And there are certain things that we see happening that aren't even witnessed by the younger sister, such as their whole interaction the morning after that sex scene where they're outside. Which is interesting to me then that, Breillat decided to title the film after her and not even necessarily include her as a witness in all of the scenes. And I think especially when you get to the ending of the film, which kind of snaps everything into being focused on her, and for, I think, the first time, as far as like totally taking over the movie or forcing you to view the entire movie through the lens of this other character. And I think that's interesting that this sex scene we were talking about the whole time in the background in her bed, presumably listening to it, is her sister. So she is kind of the filter through which we're seeing, I guess you could say, like an unvarnished look at what's happening outside of Elena's perspective. But at the same time, we don't always get that. So I am curious about how that balance plays to you guys. And if needed, we can get into the ending as well.
Well, I think it almost only hammers home the like other depressive aspect of the movie, is that it feels like the titular fat girl is not even the star of her own story, which is exactly how she feels, and like, or at least like what she probably is made to believe. And I think people, especially young women, I can only assume these things, that, and from what I've heard from women, that like that's how it feels to be in the situation such as this, especially when it comes to superficial matters like your body and things. You feel that you are not the main character or something, and that just really is, she's like shoved into the background, she's off screen. Like, the romantic movie that this is not her romantic movie, and that is what's so depressing about the movie itself, and does add the other factor of like, there's the coercion of the young sister, but also just the sheer depressive weight of being sort of this left in the rain other sister is just really hard to take in this movie at certain points.
Yeah, I think there are ways that Breillat reminds us that her focus is indeed on Anai, and that the audience's focus should be on Anai. I think there are moments when she comes back to asserting the importance and necessity and agency of this character. And one of those is in the exchange that Anai and Elena have when Elena shows Anai the beautiful opal ring that Fernando has grifted from his mother to give her to, promise that they're going to get married. I don't know what the fuck he said to her, but she's showing Anai this ring, and Anai is like, what? Like, you shouldn't have that. Like, that feels not right to me. And she's like asserting, like, this feels off. I don't like, this is fishy. Like, I don't think you should trust him. I think he's just like saying shit and whatever. And, like, we know when we're watching this that Anai is right. And Breillat is reminding us this girl, the titular character, is actually the one who understands more about life, more about love, more about sex, more about the dynamics between men and women than any other character, including the adults, their parents, in the film. And that she is constantly being overlooked and underestimated. But that does not mean that she is not, in fact, the most important person in this story.
And that particular thought is what I want to explore when it comes to the ending, which I'll go ahead and just spoil now. If anybody's listening wants to watch this movie, go watch it and then return. We'll still be here. This, honestly, I had no idea that there was some kind of controversial or shocking ending coming. And honestly, this might have been one of the most surprising final 5 minutes I've ever watched, because I was caught so completely off guard. It happened so quickly and out of nowhere and goes from 0 to 60 so quickly. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And by the time then it freeze frames and actually goes to black, I just turned to Seth you just saw that too, right? This is we're both
we were both in the same room.
You are so not prepared tonally or on a plot level or anything for all of a sudden axe murderer to break through their windshield and kill her family and take the main character away to rape her. And that's exactly what happens, pretty abruptly. And I kept waiting, all right, is this going to be revealed to be a fantasy or a dream sequence? And
right, me too.
It almost feels that way.
It does.
Yeah.
It absolutely does.
And whether we're supposed to take it that way, it's not confirmed by the time it goes to the credits. So we're left with the question that, is this something that that Anai wants to happen? Is this her idea of something that is expressing her power in the way that she sees that it should be taken somehow? Is this her getting revenge on them? And if so, how does the murder of the rest of her family square with her being raped? And is she in fact embracing that assault? And is that against her will or for her will? And the movie leaves so much of that up for you to decide at that point, that for me, it's I feel like I have to reframe the entire movie to understand what is going on here. And I really, when it first happened, had no idea what to do with it. So let's dig in. What the hell is going on here?
Yeah, when we asked,
isn't it remarkable?
It's
by the way,
it's a fantastic ending.
It's beautiful.
I mean, it's hard to say oh yeah, it's great, it's fantastic, but I mean, it really is just a breathtaking final few minutes, to
it's
the point where
remarkable art. I will say that.
I mean, it really is. It's provocative and frightening, and exactly like you said, Marc, kind of that thing where after you see it, you're like, did that actually just happen that way? Did I actually just actually witness that after, the last 75, 80 minutes of this? And, you asked at the beginning, why I like this film so much in comparison to the other Breillats that I've seen. And I called out to Carlee that this is, of the three films, the only one that doesn't utilize like a narrative voiceover from one of the protagonists, that it's all just played out in the scenes, and that it also doesn't ever give us, and maybe, like you said, this is up to interpretation, but doesn't really give us any fantasy elements, which feels like an integral part of both Romance and Anatomy of Hell. At certain points, there are kind of these like very expressive visions where things internally are made manifest in like externalities that we view within the film. And I think that this is meant to be interpreted like totally cut and dry, like this is real, this happens. These women are brutalized in various ways, and then the movie just ends. And I think that like what happens to NIE is important in the context of everything that came before it. Like you said, it all kind of like just sort of locks into place, and you realize that both she and Elena are now victims of men's sexual violence in very distinctive and like separate ways. And I almost like, hesitate to say this. I said this to Carlee when we were talking about it, but I was like, it's almost as if like Elena got like the worst end of this because she was like, experienced all of this sort of like manipulation and coercion, and also had like the emotional turmoil for, a extended period of time of having to feel all of this like psychological pain associated with it. Whereas like Anais is something where she makes no if, ands, or buts about what's happening. She knows what's happening to her and sort of kind of allows it to happen, which is why by the end of it, she's also sort of denying to the authorities that she was raped, that like she sort of is almost taking possession of it, because she's had this conversation already where she said, like, I don't want my first time to be with someone who's going to pretend to love me. And then I, find out that they're lying about that thing. I want it to be just some random person. I want it to be someone I don't care about. And in like, about the like darkest, most like brutal and Breillat way imaginable, like she kind of gets her wish. Like she gets the thing that she like is explaining to everybody throughout the movie, that, and to Elena, that she's asking for. That sounded awful the way I just said that. She's not asking for it, but like that to me is kind of the interpretation of the film,
or at least that she understands is sort of like the way that she wants to move into being a sexual person. Right. Like that's her she knows that there is nothing but like, sort of like duplicitousness and heartbreak and lies and manipulation. And she's like, I would rather just lose my virginity to someone I don't care about and who doesn't care about me, so that I can move on and like do other stuff
and murder my family.
Yeah.
There's that part of it too.
Everybody's looking for that. For me, it doesn't really matter if it is like, I like to. I don't feel like this filmmaker is a filmmaker that is all that much interested in like pulling some switcheroo as to whether or not it happened. I don't think either way it happened. It's just operating in an absurdist mode. I think at this point, I would say it's like, it is like something that happens in reality, but in the movie and the way it feels so over the top. And yeah, absurd is kind of the word. And I think it does track in a certain way with some aspects of the movie that are so like convenient or perfect or picturesque. And even in like the contrast, you have the college guy and Elena rolling around on the beach, and it looks like a photo shoot or something, almost in a way that is like skewed in this like absurd, like too convenient way. But I mean, I think it is just there, and it is upsetting, and it does follow. I mean, that final line is haunting, and in both cases, I guess I'm curious about this filmmaker and their intention with the messaging. Just interesting. At least what I can read from it is that, in which we've seen in reality, that in both cases a woman can walk away, like whether it's like the most quote unquote beautiful night where they just, they can't believe that they were coerced, they choose not to accept that, or the world won't accept that even if they want to say that. But there's also the violent end of things can get very violent, and still it is not called for what it is by either the world or unfortunately the person who is wronged. I wonder if that's what's going on here.
To me, the most convincing reading as far as her intent is pretty much what everyone has been saying so far, which to me, I mean, does feel pretty nihilistic of her, that by having this big swing and ending with this act at the end seems to be suggesting that whether she wanted this to happen or not, that the only way to get through, to come out alive in the end with this state of affairs between men and women, is through just submission to the male violence and to survive. And she is the only one who emerges alive at the end. And there is an aspect of her submitting to it, to saying, no, I wasn't raped, when she comes back. And I feel like the light that puts on the rest of the film is like, she is saying that she's kind of sweeping it all together, that there's a correlation between that happening and the deflowering that we see earlier on in the movie. And I think you could argue that maybe that risks oversimplifying things, that is this really the only state of affairs, the only way of survival in the end?
There is wish fulfillment going on, though. There totally is, because there is the fact that this rapist is choosing her. It feels like, I don't know. I got that feeling that he's like, rather than all the other men in her life, he is bypassing her beautiful sister and whacking her on the head and choosing her. And like, I don't like, in this ugly, like, horrible way.
I was incredibly blindsided by the end of this film, as we all were. But what I will say is all of the highway shots,
terrifying,
all of the moments sort of leading up to that climax, like, I did not feel at ease. I definitely felt like we were shifting into a different mood of the film. And I felt like, those shots where we're seeing the Mercedes that the mom is driving, but we're seeing it within the rear view mirror of a man driving a truck. Like, those shots are ones that do not feel comfortable to me and ratchet up the tension and just made me feel like something was going to happen there. That the sort of 10-15 minutes of them on the highway and stopping at rest stops, and importantly, Elena going to the bathroom. When she went to go to the bathroom after they had parked and it was nighttime, I was like, oh, she's about to get her shit rocked. Like, something terrible is going to happen to her. And she comes back to the car totally unscathed. She gets in the car and Anais says, don't forget to lock the door. Again, she's like mothering better than the mother is. Like, she's the person who is like aware that they are potentially in danger. And all those things leading up to the climax, I think, do a really good job of like not setting you in a position to expect what happens, but at least put you in this like state of irresolution and like unease.
I was led to like lull like into anticlimax, so that's interesting to hear you say that. But I think either one is very effective as to like serving the big explosion at the end. Because I was like, I thought what was being communicated to me was the whole like anticlimax of everything, that like this big huge fake ass romance was building towards nothing, and just a long depressive drive home to back to school and work and such. And no, it is, but like both are like like the highway stuff is not throwaway at all. It is very much about lulling you or building something there. And I thought that was very impressive, for sure.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up that scene, because that was definitely probably my favorite stretch of the film after the epic virginity losing, as far as just pure filmmaking. That it's just all of a sudden, it's like for minutes and minutes on end, this becomes a movie about just visually experiencing getting boxed in by giant trucks and trying to pass around and work your way through and then get between another one, and people are honking at you, and there is like a kind of stress building in there. Like, it's anyone who's
mom's getting tired.
Anyone who's been in that ominous kind of feeling out in highway driving late at night, like that could relate to it. And it's almost just this expressionistic sequence of just nothing but but just movement and feeling, where so much of the rest of the movie is about character interactions and dialogue. Um, I did well. I'm about to switch gears for the last time here, but unless did you have something else you wanted to say about that? Okay. I do think that we should address that this movie was especially controversial because just from a potentially an ethical perspective, that we have this very young actress who not only has nude scenes, is participating in this rape scene that is clearly not. There's not any kind of alternate angles going on where you can tell that the actor is being protected from what's going on the other end, where you can in a lot of other movies. And I think some people were harsh on this for those reasons, as far as just the responsibility of making it. And there may be no good answer to this, question, because who knows how this actor felt going through all this or how she feels about it today. But I know we've talked about a number of Larry Clark films on this podcast where similar issues have come up. And I think it helps that in this movie, unlike in a Larry Clark film where you can always feel the camera kind of leering and being titillated by what's going on, that's definitely not happening here.
No.
But there is but you still could look at the ethics of how you film material like this when you're dealing with actors. So just kind of want to open that up, because I don't really have a good answer for this either, except that it did make me uncomfortable in a movie way that was outside of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't like a super easy answer here. I know, we were talking about this film in the Hit Factory Discord ahead of this, and I hadn't honestly even like thought about this particular component of the film as I was watching, just because it is so kind of like immersive and assaulting throughout, and especially at the end, you're kind of just like shocked and taken aback. And someone mentioned, they're like, I think the movie's great, except for like the kind of reprehensible ethics of what happens at the end. And I realized I hadn't even like kind of thought about it, or even figured into or factored the fact that this actress was of like a very, very young age when it happened,
and hasn't been in anything since. I don't believe. I couldn't find anything about her.
I trust someone like a Breillat to take this kind of thing very seriously, though, as we've already mentioned, and we will continue to mention on this episode, someone who has featured unsimulated sexual encounters, who has visages and images of genitalia and lots of things in her movies that require some sort of conversation and some sort of development of a level of trust between her and her crew and her actors, you would hope. So I mean, there's not enough information on my end to like really say whether or not like, this was done maliciously and with like, evil in it, or if not. But I do think that the ethics of it are really like tricky. Like this is very thin ice you're walking on with this kind of thing. But to me, as you said, like the actual final product of it is not something that's done with a leering, with kind of like a seeming like participation in the violence that's being enacted on the character, and everything seems to be, I mean, as above board as you can make a scene like this, in terms of how it's expressed, how it feels, and how it's communicated within the film.
I'm glad you brought up Larry Clark. I was thinking about him and his movies actually, and I totally agree. Like, I think there actually is a difference, and one that matters, between, the types of things that you might see in one of his films and the perspective of his camera and of him as a filmmaker, compared to what Breillat puts in her films, the perspective of her camera and her as a filmmaker. And I do think that one is more reprehensible than the other, Larry's being the one that is more reprehensible and problematic. I think there are some people that would just say, like, the existence of this scene at all is an issue.
Yeah.
And then I think there are some people that would say how this was handled is what determines whether or not this was an issue. And then I think there are some people that might say it's in the film and it's in the film for a reason, and I think that should be what we focus on. And I can say that, like, I'm probably not in the first camp, but oscillate between, the other two. And my perspective probably is a combination of both of those. I, can't imagine that this wouldn't be affecting as a young girl, no matter how engaged or protected or participatory you are and willing in the events of the production. But I do think that Breillat is able to, assert the grotesqueries of an exchange like this pretty effectively. That speaks to me in such a way that, assures me of like her care and her perspective of this type of thing off screen and on screen. I mean, they're covered in dirt and like slime from the forest, and like it's very fast. And she focuses really closely on Anai and her face. And we see, part of her body exposed. And it's incredibly challenging and very hard to watch. But Breillat's films are filled with things that are difficult to watch, which is why we're here. And the last thing I'll say about it is I'm not applauding the potentially problematic events of the production if there were issues there, but I do really want to applaud the performance of Anai, the actress that plays Anai. I think she's stunning in this film and truly like acts circles around everyone else, despite the fact that we've said in this conversation the film often casts her to the side or puts her in these sort of like repulsive positions and scenarios that juxtapose her potential ugliness with a more conventional beauty that we might see in Elena. I just think that the performance by that actress is really, really incredible, and she does an awesome job all the way up until the final frame of this film when she just absolutely like crushes it.
Oh, truly. And I mean, if we're going around, I guess as much as I want to be like in the gray zone in the world of French transgression or whatever, I am pretty hard lined about the nudity of minors in both these movies. I think, just as far as like in my head, in both cases, especially in this case, we are dealing with sort of experimental, like gray, like not like almost ambiguous conversation starter, like ending like this. I don't think it's a very safe place to put a girl and her nudity. Like I don't know, like it's just isn't in my opinion. As far as like, I just go to the adults and I'm just like, I can't really hear like a good argument as for why it has to be at the possible expense of this girl's feelings and things, whether that's now or 20 years from that moment. It's like tough stuff for a grown actress to deal with. So I don't know. I guess that's where I pretty much land with it.
Yeah, that's totally valid. I agree with you.
Yeah, I think we've covered the whole expanse of what the reactions and rationales for those reactions could be for this, and that's not the last time this is going to come up in talking about her films either. This is definitely what she trades in. We'll usually wrap up each conversation with us declaring whether we would unwatch a film if we could. I feel pretty confident that there's no unwatches with you two guys, or with myself, even though there were. I'm still haven't fully reconciled how the ending functions in this movie in particular. But Seth, I feel like there is maybe a question for you about whether you would unwatch this or not. But of course, anyone correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't unwatch it. I'd unwatch like maybe the final scene if I could, just for my own sanity, I guess. And I don't know. I do think it is just really affecting and really rough. I don't know. I'm like close to it just out of how difficult I was not expecting it to be so difficult for me. Just even on the line of, and I mean, maybe that does make it so that it was a very worthwhile experience for me, because it was on, like, what was hard was on the line of this feeling like a window into what maybe some female friends or girlfriends like have expressed to me on various levels, both of these sisters, their experiences, whether it be like the self-esteem and the, or like the like unfortunate like sexual awakenings and things like that I've been privy to, as far as like what's been told to me. And putting myself there was like so dark, and so like it's one thing to hear about it and try and have your heart break about it. It's another thing to go in there. So as much as it was like very difficult, I have to say that it was like something I probably like was good for me as a male to like view.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, along those lines, along those same lines for me. I really loved, even when it was painful, seeing those moments sort of, brought to bear and illuminated on screen. It was comforting, even when it was challenging, to see experiences that I have, feelings that I have, and thoughts that I've had express themselves on screen and be handled with such care and by someone who's so fluent in them. I found that really like empowering and important.
There's not a movie in my life I've seen that I would unwatch.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there is.
No,
for me.
Like the films of Catherine Breillat, art and your experience with it is full of ecstasies and terrors both, and repulsion and anger are very human emotions that are vital to experience and understand. And sometimes when art elicits those, it means that it's meaningful, even if you don't ever want to do it again.
Well said. And speaking of that, we'll go ahead and move on to Anatomy of Hell, our second Breillat film. This came out in 2004 and is, although some of the same themes are going to come up, I feel like this is a very different animal than Fat Girl, and is actually based on a book that Breillat wrote, which I didn't realize until too recently, but and I don't know how easy it is to find. I'm a little curious as to how this reads on the page. I think the title translates to Pornocracy,
Yeah.
which is amazing title, first of all.
Awesome title.
Very cool title.
Yeah. And but this is a very conceptual film, and I feel like this is the diametric opposite of Fat Girl, which is going for naturalism and realism, and this is like a full on I don't know, like experiment or performance art almost. And I'll just get it out of the way, like up front. I had a real hard time with this movie, so but we'll keep it interesting talking about this one, because this is definitely a kind of movie that you could see someone finding to be very profound, or somebody just hating on every on every level.
Yeah.
This is
Completely.
a polarizing film.
Here we are.
Here we are.
And it actually is I think our first film where they say unwatchable in the dialogue, which is
We were so psyched.
yeah.
I
we
didn't
paused
think
it.
about that.
When
Oh
I'm
my God, that's so
unwatchable. Look at
true.
that.
I love
We had
that.
to pause it
Yeah.
and take a screenshot just so maybe
Big
we can use
moment.
that.
Oh my
They
God.
say the title of the
Yeah.
podcast in the podcast.
Yes, completely.
That's
I
terrific.
posted a screenshot of that exact like line in the movie because
Yeah.
I was talking about that moment. I love that. That's so good.
So yeah, basically this is a two-hander. Probably a lot of people listening to this will not have seen this movie, and may not after they hear us talk about it either. But
That would be a mistake
It'd be a
for the
mistake,
record.
sure. But I don't know if I was just going to do a real quick summary, because there's not a lot to talk about, like plot-wise. We basically have two characters who meet each other in a gay club, a gay man and a woman who he walks in on slitting her wrists in the bathroom, and they get to know each other. Well, they don't really get to know each other before she, I guess, employs him in a way.
They have a mysterious poetic conversation.
One of many.
And yes, employs him.
Where she wants to have him come and, I guess, observe her in some way as a gay man who is not attracted to her, which is immediately called into question, seeing as, within an hour of meeting, she's already given him oral sex, and there's sex that happens.
And he comes real fast.
He sure does.
He seemed to kind of be into it, yeah. And he seems to be kind of into the times that they have sex on their 3 nights they spend, or 4?
4 nights.
4 nights together.
4 crazy nights.
Yeah.
4 crazy nights.
And but yeah, I'll leave it there for now. I don't even really know where to first dive into this movie, because we do have the one actor is an actual adult film actor.
Rocco Siffredi.
Yeah.
Sweet, beautiful Rocco.
Who's also in Romance as well.
Big, thick cock.
Huge cock.
And massive cock. Yeah. This is a thing about Breillat, though. Like, all of her actors are like meated up. Like, I don't know if you guys noticed this with Fernando too, but like when he comes to the bed in Fat Girl, like with just his kind of shirt on and open, and he's already like very erect, like he's also packing. And I feel like Breillat has this thing where, I think part of it is maybe that she is hiring adult film stars, so they are already well endowed, and have a certain comfort around being nude on screen. But also I think that like Breillat wants to evoke like the phallic image as something that's as like enormous and kind of like penetrating and sort of dangerous as possible. Like, it looks like it would hurt to deal with something like that.
It's basically like the axe at the end of Fat Girl.
It's like the axe at the end of Fat Girl.
Yeah.
It's the proverbial axe. Yes. Everything is a penis. I will also just say that both of those actors, and I mean no offense to any Dottavio on the podcast, but both actors are Italian.
Yes.
And Italian men tend to be typically very well endowed.
Good
I
for
will
them.
say that.
Very good for them.
I will allow that comment to just stand.
You do not have to say anything.
No proof necessary.
I will not. But I guess I should go a little further to describe that basically the whole movie is their 4 nights of these 2 characters spending together. And it's basically a lot of philosophical, intellectual, abstract monologues or conversations with each other, pontificating about female sexuality, about the male and female intimacy.
The sex and the death and the sex and the death, and they are one.
While we just continually see what kind of horrible things we can penetrate this woman with, and things we can, do to her body or take from her body.
Lots of period stuff. She is this on like during this time. She's on her period.
That she is. And so if this is, if you're gonna be ready for a kind of movie where, characters are going to drink from a glass with a used tampon in it, like this is that kind of movie.
It's one of those.
Yeah.
The period shots, as I call them. Like, everyone, let's do shots of period juice.
Let's do the period shots.
Sorry.
Now. There's I mean, this is a significant amount of blood used in this film, and the conversations around it are always very fascinating too. It is very French, as you suggested, Seth, with the sex and the death, and they're one. And
oui.
A line in this movie from Rocco Siffredi where he says something along the lines of fecal matter is different than blood because it's gone through its life cycle, and in that way it mirrors the human experience. It's like that.
Yeah.
It's that kind of movie.
That was one of my favorites, I think, just as far as like, well, that's why I'm gay, okay? Poop is dead. But
Poop
like
is
blood
dead.
is alive.
I can't
I don't want
handle,
nothing
like,
living
this
in there.
life-giving like responsibility you've got. Like, I need to strictly deal with fecal matter.
Yeah.
Give me the poop.
I gotta say, this guy is the worst gay bestie ever. For
unhelpful.
Yeah.
He's not helping her pick out shoes.
So I guess maybe is the first question, is why she decided to make this gay character, but also why he still seems to be sexually interested in her, unless maybe you don't interpret it that way.
I am curious about this. Yes.
But I mean, I was thinking there is something going on here of just a suggestion that there is something so fundamental to masculinity that there's a connection, no matter what your orientation is, that the relationship is still going to be the same with the female body, or that perhaps more pointedly that the straight man is going to regard a woman in the same objectifying or disgusted way. But there's a lot going on here on those lines.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're pretty spot on there with some of your observations, Marc, that like the movie is about, I mean, in like the most base terms, like a gay man becoming so like overwhelmed and mesmerized by like female sexuality and female anatomy that he begins to question his very like sense of his own sexuality and self a little bit, you know? And I think that you're right that the film is sort of positing that there is an intrinsic quality to masculinity, an intrinsic quality even more so to like misogyny, right? And the power dynamics and the sense of control that men must have in their lives, regardless of whether they regard women as sexual objects or not. And the movie kind of posits that they all do to some extent. And yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating that it's like this kind of example of how misogyny pervades even across genders, across sexual identities, across all of these things, that it is sort of like this strangely inherent part of the dynamic between men and women, which, you know, seems like it's pretty in line with Breillat's themes in other films, but being explored here in a particularly fascinating way because these are two characters who are not supposed to have a sexual dynamic and yet do, like, from the outset of the film and then for the remaining like 75 minutes.
I think that the declaration by Amira at the outset that you can look at me impartially because you don't want me is a sort of like impossibly like flagrant and like delusional declaration on purpose by Breillat. And I think the sort of thesis of the film is that like that impartiality that any man may regard a female and her body with like is not existent. It simply doesn't exist. And we understand really quickly that it doesn't because of how much disgust Rocco Siffredi's character has when he first starts talking about the female body and female anatomy. It's not impartial at all. He's got a lot of feelings about it. And so I like that she sets us up to sort of understand implicitly what a falsehood that is. And then immediately, you know, affirms it with all of the ensuing conversation and the events of the film.
Yeah. I mean, she wants to self-harm in a public place, right? Because she's hoping someone will notice her, and someone does. And I really like the way the film begins this way, and really just it is a push-pull of the power dynamics in the space, because you can tell that there is sort of a psychological hold that Amir Kassar has on Siffredi's character throughout, and how she's sort of dictating the circumstances of her own observation. But there's also, you know, a constant power play on his part where he's trying to almost like break her down with some of his ways of describing and the repulsion he feels. And you can tell in certain moments when she's explaining this that she has some shame about herself too. And that, you know, there isn't necessarily for some time like a clear like winner loser in this scenario, that there's a lot of shifting in terms of the ground that each one is seating at different times.
You know, it's interesting that the place she goes looking for this is arguably like the only place in the city or perhaps even country where she would go where like she wouldn't have men hitting on her.
Right.
So I think she probably went to the wrong place if that's what she was looking for. But
I mean, the dialogue is the real aspect of this that is going to make or break. I think even more so than the sexual content. I mean, I don't know. If you're all the way to digging up a movie like this, you're probably already in the zone where you're not going to get too disgusted by a lot of this sort of thing. What makes or breaks it for me in particular is the dialogue and how these characters don't feel like real human beings. And or like your mileage may vary is probably like what I would say about it is that they don't like people don't talk like this, right? It's not naturalistic in the way that Fat Girl is. These are like they feel like mouthpieces in some ways, and I don't know. I think there is some very colorful language going on, and I like more so at the beginning where I feel like it's more amorphous what's happening, and as it goes along, it does seem like the thesis is just very like stated and overstated and overstated and overstated, and then also given colorful illustration with what they're doing constantly to the point of like exasperation, even though it's a short film for me. Uh, like I don't know. After a while, it's just like I got it. I feel like I got it kind of like the male aggression and the like I don't know, just the sex and death and the sex and death. I don't know, very like French transgression beginner course or something. I don't know. I was just like a little at a loss. I don't know for finding much as it went along.
colorful illustrations is a really great way to put it.
They are colorful.
Seth, I think you're underselling it. But yeah, no, I wanted to like write down so many lines in this movie because it's pretty much like everything that comes out of somebody's mouth is so loaded.
Yeah.
The ocean rolling away like a bitch in heat.
Right. My the one that I did go out of my way to find just to give everyone an idea of like what this movie sounds like. And I don't totally remember the context of this, but he's saying something like the elastic resistance of a boy's anus does not lie about the tightness of his lower intestine. The lie about the softness of women is hateful, the malevolent trivialities that turn them into that trap, the horror of nothingness that is the imprescriptible awe. Which I've been saying that for years.
For years, you've been saying that.
And I'm glad to see somebody finally articulate it.
I actually literally did say the line about the softness of women being hateful this morning to Carlee, just as like a joke.
men's stories matter. They
So
just
funny.
do.
That's right. Men's stories matter.
So if you know, if it's that kind of movie, and if you're not going to be, if you're going to be disposed to hearing things like that, and then seeing this parade of graphic, usually pretty gross, things happening, to just be kind of silly on that level, that I could see
get the
you
word
not
pretentious
getting
out of your head.
Yeah, and I hate using the word
probably.
pretentious in any context because the last thing we need is more like TikTokers making fun of any movie that doesn't make $100 million or that's not in English as pretentious.
Right.
But this would not be a really great example to show them, to counter them.
I think it's going to be a TikTok sensation. Once they finally find this movie.
So it sounds like that was a barrier for me and Seth to just take this movie seriously. And it seems like you guys have more of an appreciation for how that experience actually plays out.
I totally understand where you guys are coming from. And can absolutely see that. And I feel like a lot of people probably would watch this film and feel the same way. And I think that's maybe important and potentially like part of Breillat's statement. I can't say, but I do think that she makes art that is not welcoming and potentially like on consistent footing tonally, and maybe like putting you at a remove or making you not take it seriously. Like that is an interesting thing to explore in and of itself. I actually think the way that the relationship between the two characters and their conversation shifts is an evolution. I didn't feel like it stagnated at all. I think importantly, in the beginning of their encounter and in these first couple nights, and maybe the first night only, it's clear that Rocco Siffredi's character has more of the power. He walks away several times. She's sort of like saying, like, you're dallying, like, you haven't looked at me. Like, she's, the one saying, like, I didn't have time to undress. And he's sitting back and drinking and regarding her and sort of tossing off, all of these things about all the ways that women's bodies are disgusting. One of the ones that I wrote down that I really love and also hate is when he's describing vaginas, and he's like talking about how the sort of texture of the skin and how like it oozes, and he's comparing it to frogs, and then he says frogs at least have the decency of being green.
I wrote that down.
Your denial of the obscenity is what frightens us most. And I fucking love that. And it's also just like, holy shit.
He goes on to say something
got daggers.
He goes on to say something too where he's like, there's an irony, or like there's meaning in the fact that you can both spread your thighs open the same amount. Like,
yes,
frogs and women. It's like,
I feel like Kermit would have something to say about how easy it is being green that might disagree.
He sure would.
There's a good Muppet sketch to be made with Kermit as Rocco and Miss Piggy as
oh my god,
America Star, though.
This is Meet the Feebles, basically. Another one that we've covered.
I'll say this about it too, and this is just kind of, I guess, to your points, Seth and Marc, about like the indulgences of the film. And I certainly agree with you in certain regard that like the film is in a lot of ways what I would call indulgent, but I also stop for a moment and question too, like how we kind of approach that conversation when it comes to film specifically and art, where like there's often sort of a like pejorative connotation to like minimalist indulgence and not to maximalism, where like I think about something, and this is very different, I know I'm making like a false equivalence here, but like I think about something like a Megalopolis, where like a great filmmaker of the new Hollywood puts $150 million of his own winery money into making this like massive, big, excessive thing, and I know it's being met with some tepidness from some critics, but overall, like I think people are like, oh, like it is this thing that is like a pure statement of like this artist's work and their mind. Breillat's not doing something so different. She's just doing it with like $500,000 and putting in two people in a room, but it is all of like the kind of ideas of her entire oeuvre like put into one space and just communicated in words. So, I yes, is it indulgent? Absolutely. Is that a bad thing? I don't know. I mean, it is a very, a word we've used already, a very unvarnished look at all of her like career long fixations and like predilections in one like 75-minute runtime.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, either way, it is like, it's a good lesson in though, like, what are you bringing is really what it comes down to. It's not so much like minimal versus maximal is worse or better, or even if you are just being totally like a scab in front of the audience and like you are like totally naked, it doesn't always equate to like I'm gonna love it or something. I guess like the content still is where I have issue with it, and maybe it comes from some sort of frustration with, and it can't really help it, the context, which is this obscure, very arty French movie. It feels like it's like preaching to a choir that is me, is already like reading Genet and stuff like that, and like Dennis Cooper things, and also even just down to the ideas of like the disgusting nature of like period blood. Like I don't know. That's just that feels like this audience that it's talking to is not the audience that it's talking to, which is like, I don't know, probably kind of left wing, like progressive, and is not having like that kind of aversion to the female body like Republican dads are. I figure everybody's kind of over having period sex at this point, but maybe that's just me. I don't know. That's just an example, but
I think that, I mean, what you were saying to Aaron about how this is really distilling her worldview down. And I think that I've gotten a pretty good sense of Breillat's view of male-female relationships and the dynamics between them through having seen I think I've had seen 5 of her movies now, and they all seem to be coming from kind of the basic same place. And maybe it's just that when it is distilled down like this and just kind of coming out and saying everything, that starts to make it sound a little reductive, or that it's better when, if we have it in the context of a more naturalistic drama that's about character interaction, that adds the gray area to it, that makes it a little more approachable. Or if she is being a little too nihilistic about things, that it's easier to take or to find counter examples when it's a different kind of filmmaking. Where here, it really is just this hard, just uncut brick of exactly of her philosophies. And it does make me wonder, man, has she ever had a good relationship with somebody? Is it really all this horrible and
joyless? Yeah.
And as somebody who is as the I am a gay guy who has these conversations with my straight or bi friends and stuff, about sex and the difference between males and females and everything. And I generally hear a lot more, positivity about women's bodies, which isn't to say that there isn't, obviously there's a whole world history of straight men acting out, misogynistic ideas about female bodies and everything. But it is, putting it to the point where it's there's, even gay men and straight men, it all is this really ugly, debasing, disgusted view of women. But then again, maybe it's not fair of me to say that she's saying that it's always like that, and that's just the area she chooses to explore artistically.
Okay, I have so many thoughts. I'm gonna try to not be a fucking asshole.
Be an asshole. That's fine.
No, not even to you guys, but just by talking for 20 minutes, which I don't want to do, and I could do about this film. I think so. All of your points stand, and I'm not even going to say I disagree with any of them, because I don't really. I am coming at it from a slightly different perspective, in that I don't think she's saying all men are this, or all my relationships are this, or all female relationships are this. I think what she is asserting is the female experience, which is often terrorizing, and even when it is filled with pleasure, met with a lot of disgust. This is something I experience online, just sort of casually, people not being able to handle a woman talking about sex or being sexual openly. And I experience it from people who would certainly call themselves progressive, left wing, whatever you want to call it. And so I think that it is less about certain people feel this way about women and other people don't, and more just asserting a subjective perspective of what it is like to be female in a world built for and by men, and supported by women. And I think that is maybe how I try to understand all of her work, and just de facto for me, because I'm a woman. And so it's very easy for me to recognize she is asserting the female experience here, even in the words that are coming out of this man's mouth. And I think the sort of ridiculousness of what he's saying is purposeful. And I actually find the exaggeration and sort of heightened extremity of the language they're using and the statements they're making to be really refreshing, because it's stuff that exists. These are things people feel. These are things society demonstrates against women in countless ways: materially, emotionally, politically, spiritually, psychologically. And they may, the powers that be may never say these words, but that doesn't mean that's not how it feels. That doesn't mean that's not what's happening. That doesn't mean I am not being made to feel like a toad or a creature or a commodity or whatever it may be, something to be prodded. And so it is it's breathtaking at times for me to hear some of these things, because I feel like she is giving voice to things that so often go unsaid, or that we sort of like brush aside and say like, well, only crazy people say these things and feel these things, and only problematic people say these things and feel these things. When in fact, it's like, I can point to a myriad of experiences on a daily basis that reflect so many of the perspectives and words that come out of Rocco Siffredi's character's mouth, even if no one ever says those words to me, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. That actually was that was just a really good way to articulate what you could get out of this movie, because you're right that the way that things feel and what the experience is like for a person does not necessarily, depend on taking in this totally, objective view of, whether all people are like this or not. That
Right.
the subjectivity is key here, I think.
It's personalized.
For sure. Absolutely. What are your thoughts?
I agree.
Okay.
Careful.
No, I mean,
I just bludgeon you into submission.
No, not at all. I mean, I maintain what I said before, which is that, I think this is something, and Breillat in general is a filmmaker that speaks to Carlee more than to me, but I understand the reasons for that. Is, some of that is because of our gender and the way that we engage with and experience the world and various dynamics within it. But I think that this one is, for me, even more so than romance, revealing of a certain kind of nature and sort of like you said, sort of like subliminal experience of womanhood and of masculinity. And in a lot of ways, I think like the film is, being blunt and maybe being very aggressive in terms of its of kind of what it's trying to say and its ideas. But there is this, especially as we get to the end, which, is an interesting thing that maybe we can talk about, like after they stop seeing each other, where, this man is so like overwhelmed by kind of like the confusion he's feeling, not just around his sexuality, but around like his sense of and his hold on the power that he has over the opposite sex, that he begins to fall immediately into some of the most like tired and well-worn like tropes of misogyny imaginable, right? Like, just sitting drinking at a bar being like, yeah, I should have killed that bitch, like I should have smacked her, like I hate her so much, like, yeah. And this old guy who's like egging him on eventually is just like,
It looks like he came out of a David Lynch movie.
Yeah, he does.
Totally does.
Yeah.
And even this like older guy, who's like, drinking with him at the bar and like trying to console him and be like, don't let him get under your skin. Don't ever let a woman, like become more important than any of the other women out there. At the end is almost sort of like, yeah, dude, okay, like chill a little bit. Like, like, like you're.
Well, that scene's really funny because he does launch into like one of the poetic, like nobody talks like this things. And then the old guy's just like, yeah, man, I don't know, calm down. just like,
yeah,
chill out, dude. Like, take a swig, take a breather, you're fine.
I didn't mean this. Like,
he's like, yeah, sounds like a real bitch. And
Totally.
Which, I mean, he should have been the third guy in the room with both of them.
Right.
They needed a mediator. Is what
Well,
they
just
needed.
have a beer and calm down.
Calm down, guys.
There's a very like white, like neoliberal feminist version of this that has like a ref, like a mediator in it that like expresses like who wins each bout and like where we're at and everything. So
I think what the man is trying to say here.
Yeah, totally. Oh God, I hate that movie.
What I'm hearing when I hear you bring up a frog.
Literally. Fuck.
And when you push her off the cliff and we see her die.
Okay, is that real? Did he kill her, or is this
Yeah,
where we're another fantasy situation?
What are our thoughts on the ending?
For me, it's another fat girl thing where it's like it's operating on this mode where I mean, in the context of the movie, it might as well have happened, and it happened in front of my eyes. I don't know. I am again just kind of lost as to where the man is at the end of this movie, as far as like I'm not understanding his frustrations. I'm not tracking his like logic. I mean, other than it just being yet another like, and yes, like there is aggression in love and sex, and therefore I must destroy this thing that frustrates me, and the man must kill woman. That's the end of that sentence.
Well, he says in the bar something that I think is revealing. Amid his whining, he says at one point, "She took everything from me." That to me is the most important line that helps me understand what is happening in the end of the film and where his frustrations are coming from. I don't think it necessarily even has to do with like his sexuality. I think it more just has to do with the fact that she has reminded him and exposed to him the fallacies of these conceits that he started, off at the beginning of their interactions, being like incredibly assured of, and that she has, the title is revealing. It's Anatomy of Hell, right? And we're sort of like meant to take that as like a woman's body is this horrific place, when in fact what the movie asserts is that it is incredibly intoxicating and has a great deal of power, and that there is no perspective that is impartial, and not in some way drawn to this anatomy. And I think him reckoning with that is perhaps what he feels has rendered him powerless. And that is what is frustrating. And I don't know if the vision of her being pushed, of him pushing her off the cliff into the rocks and water below, actually happened. But as Seth said, like, I don't think it matters. I think it happens in the movie, and that's what's important.
Sure. Yeah, this ending didn't throw me like nearly like Fat Girls did, because especially the further you get into the movie, it's like, okay, if this ended with him killing her, like that would totally track for me. And all, and whether or not
rake up her ass.
Exactly. Which, boy, does she hold there for a long time.
I was gonna say, like,
we were talking about like
while being asleep.
Yeah.
Grip strength. Yes.
We all might have done it without knowing in our sleep. Who knows?
True.
But yeah, and by that point, I mean, again, it's not like the movie was setting up this super realistic context up to that point. So it doesn't really matter to me whether it happened or not, or even if there's even a difference. Like if at that point, if they would have joined hands and like flown into the air, I would have been like, yeah, I get it.
Totally.
But yeah, did you have anything to add to that, Aaron?
I don't think so. I mean, I think Carlee's point stands, and your observances as well, which is like psychologically, he's in the same place at the end of the film, whether or not he's actually killed this woman. And it's like a necessary thing for him to do in order to like reassert some semblance of self and dominance and power in his own life. Yeah. I mean, it's petty, but it's also like this, very real feeling kind of moment in the whole thing. And I like the ending of this quite a bit, actually.
All right. Well, I'll just give some final thoughts and then give everybody else a chance to also, if there's anything else that we haven't gotten to, because I have a feeling we're going to have a split on unwatching on this one, because
probably
I didn't, and poof, I didn't even think earlier, though I did kind of pinpoint this as like, this is like, I thought of in the realm of the senses a lot during this, because the situation, the structure is very similar of two people engaging in transgressive sexual acts for most of the movie. But also but it does feel a little closer to like Sallow than in the realm of the senses. Maybe I would put it somewhere in between those two because of the extremity of the things that we're seeing and the philosophy overlaid with the degradation kind of happening. But those, neither of those are movies I was crazy about. I liked In the Realm of Senses a lot more than Sallow, but I think sometimes for me it comes down to just a matter of taste, where if a movie is functioning so aggressively on that symbolic, conceptual level, without the tension with them acting like also functioning as, people, as three-dimensional characters. And I think just personally for me, when it seems that they are first and foremost kind of functioning as, mouthpieces, like Seth put it, or figures in the diorama, sometimes that can work. And here I just ended up feeling too disconnected from it in the end. So this would be a safe unwatch for me, even though I agree with what Aaron says about, literally, if it's like go back in time and stop myself from watching this, I also, I agree that I get something out of something, no matter how of little like worth I find it to have, because it gets you to think about what you look for in movies and about the topics that are at play. But in that sense, then I would never unwatch anything. So I have to draw a line somewhere and
Sure.
and throw this in the pile.
For the sake of the game.
Yeah. So are we on the same page about that, Seth?
For the sake of the brand, you
Right,
must draw
exactly.
a
Yes.
line.
It's all about brand. Yeah, I mean, like on paper, this should be exactly what I want, which is like borderline mystical creatures having a pornographic transgressive time
Yep.
where they speak poetically
Right there
to each
with you,
other.
Seth.
But
That's in his search history a lot.
it is. I have to type the whole thing out every time.
Good for
or
you.
It just
It
doesn't work.
starts
for
to
me,
autofill
but,
eventually.
yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. But I don't know, and it also feels dramatic, but maybe in the the movie's very dramatic, so it feels dramatic to unwatch it, kind of. It's just more of like, it always falls into like, would I actually have lasted very long into this movie without it being a podcast movie? Probably not. As I probably would have stopped it, so you could call it an unwatch in that way. I don't know. I just think like, and I agree with like the personal level of this movie, and I just don't know. I just don't know if I like this filmmaker or if I would like really jive with this person behind. I don't know, in a certain respect, not even just like as far as the content itself, but maybe in some cases I just find it, I don't know, like there's a bit of redundancy to some of what just feels like to me hollow, but I could definitely see that there is like you, and it seems like it would be very bizarre to see a 3.5 rating on this movie. I feel like it's either
Yeah.
you're really swinging one way or the other, and that just totally makes sense with what the fuck this is. Yeah.
And Seth,
Mhm.
I do want to say that I wish that maybe you'd watched like the 3 other of her movies before these 2 that I did, because
Yeah.
it shows a little more breadth in that. Like there's which were Last Summer and Brief Crossing and The Last Mistress, the one with Asia Argento, which are they're much easier to take. Some of them are even like have a lot more like sweetness to them and fuller spectrum of colors in them, that maybe made these go down a little easier for me too. Like if I thank God Anatomy of Hell was not the first film I saw by her. Like I feel like
Yeah.
that would have given me the wrong idea, and there still might be hope for you, Seth, is all I'm saying.
Do you really mean that?
We might be able to salvage you.
Cling to that.
Yeah, but you guys go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm also no, I would not unwatch this film. I may even watch it again at some point. Here, but just for fun, I'll say this about the film. I would metaphorically cast it off of a cliff into the ocean. Did I actually do that or not?
Great question.
We don't know.
We don't know.
Mm.
I'll say
We'll slowly fade away.
I will say for the record, I found plenty of parts of this film to be very difficult to watch.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't, sitting there like, oh, I love the part when he sticks a lipstick up her butt. Like that was incredibly challenging for me.
Absolutely an infection coming.
Oh,
It's just
my
a
God.
weird
It's
idea.
a weird idea, and then to put it on her, whatever. So this film is not enjoyable in like a traditional sense, right? It's not about like delivering these sort of spools of pleasure for us cinematically. But did I derive pleasure from the conversations it's having, from the statements it's making, from certain ways that it makes me feel seen as a woman? Yes, absolutely. And I don't think I would ever unwatch a movie either, and I certainly would never unwatch a Breillat film. So I'm a no unwatch.
I'm gonna
on
come
that
home
one.
and Carly's just gonna be watching this. Like,
I don't know about that. I also love Den of Thieves. So
That's very true.
those are my two
those are your
like
modes. Yeah, is a Breillat film or some sort of meathead heist thriller.
love a meathead heist thriller.
All right. Very well put. And I think any of our listeners can make the decision on their own whether this sounds like something you'd be remotely interested in or not. But before we go, and I'll try to get through this kind of quickly because I don't want to, I've taken up a lot of your time here so far, and I appreciate you sticking it out here with us. So our little questionnaire we started doing here at the end is just to get a good idea from each of you, just about certain, thoughts about films that you have. Starting with our just most basic, hopefully easy question. If you do have a favorite film, what is it?
Oh, it's such a hard question,
It's
actually.
the worst question in the world.
Here's what I'll do. I will give you two very quick answers and say that my first favorite film, because of when I saw it at the age of 6 and the obsession that I've had with it my entire life, would be Ridley Scott's Alien, just a perfect horror thriller. And another one that is a new favorite to me as of the past few years, and one that I think more people should seek out, is a 1978 film by a director named Alan Rudolph, who was a collaborator of Robert Altman's for a portion of his career. It's called Remember My Name. It's called Remember My Name. And it has Geraldine Chaplin and Anthony Perkins in it. And it's beautiful and just lush and ruminative, and has maybe one of the best on-screen performances I've ever watched in Geraldine Chaplin's performance. So check out Remember My Name, Alan Rudolph. He's an undersung director. He's one of my very favorite guys, and I think everyone should be watching his films. They're hard to come by, but my DMs at Hit Factory Pod are open. So if you need any help finding any of his movies, I'm your guy.
I just watched that movie for the first time, I want to say late last year, and I agree, it is wonderful. And I've seen many wonderful movies by him that are never streaming, always hard to find. I think Remember My Name was streaming on Amazon for like a second. That's why I was able to see it. So I will second that.
Yeah.
And the Criterion needs to get on that and start streaming his movies like they did with the Hal Harley movies this year.
Absolutely.
This is an impossible question for me. Like, I can't answer it ever. I will equivocate and say one of my favorite movies ever is Crimson Tide. I just think it's perfect, and I think that Tony Scott is one of our best and most important pop artists. And I think that film is a very perfect example of really good pop art. And I love it, and I love Denzel, and I think he's the greatest actor to ever live.
And I'm a big Hackman fan, which we argue
They're both
about,
amazing. Just like premier shouting movie. A recent film that has become my favorite that I've seen this year is a film by Julie Taymor called Titus. It's from 1999, and it stars Anthony Hopkins, and it's Shakespeare. And like, I'm not a Shakespeare person where I'm like, oh, I fucking love the plays and I love reading it. But I adore this film. I saw it on a whim because someone posted a GIF of Matthew Rhys in it, and I was like, Matthew Rhys is in this movie? Okay, I'm watching that. And it's incredible. It is absolutely stunning. Alan Cumming is in it, a whole bunch of other people. And I have never, ever felt Shakespeare come alive the way that I felt it come alive in this film with any other Shakespearean adaptation. And I cannot recommend it enough.
Do you like that we both gave you new favorites to us that are like largely unavailable and almost
I know.
impossible to find in any sort of
Completely
digital format.
On YouTube, there's a really great Italian rip of Titus for anyone who's interested.
We can also get you the English language one. Again, Hit Factory Pod, my DMs are open. I can point you in the right direction
Yes.
if you really need to see Titus. So
Shakespeare, the language is best in Italian, I've always said.
That's where the big dicks are.
Okay, cool. Well, that's two movies that have been on my watch list actually for a long time. Maybe I'll bump them up now because you make them sound very tantalizing.
Right on.
mm-hmm.
All right. So next question then is a film where your opinion drastically changed in either direction from love to hate or the other way around.
I'll go first again.
Yeah,
we'll stay in the order. Okay, so this is one that's just on my mind because we have a forthcoming episode of our own show on the Phantom Menace. But I saw the George Lucas Star Wars prequels as a kid and liked them quite a bit because I was a kid and less discriminate than I am now. And then turned on them very readily when I started becoming more of a cinephile. Just kind of went with the flow there. And the second entry, Attack of the Clones, has always been the one that people consider to be the worst. And I watched it not all that long ago and had an incredible time with it. It's pretty remarkable as just like an artifact of 2000s like digital filmmaking. It also is very narratively ambitious. It's first like a film noir, like murder mystery, and then becomes like a quasi riff on John Ford's The Searchers for a minute, and then finally ends in like a Ray Harryhausen like monster spectacle in like a gladiator coliseum. And I had a fantastic time with it and highly recommend that people give it another shot.
Man, don't even get me started on the prequels. It'll take way too long. You're speaking my language.
Edible. All right. I'm glad to hear
Oh.
that. Good. Yeah. Prequel revisionism. Not really revisionism. We've been there all along, right?
It's just true and how it happened in a galaxy far, far away. We have no control over these events. But Mark, I know that was all just Italian to you.
Yeah. I never made it more than like 45 minutes through any of the prequels, but I'm also not a huge Star Wars head, so maybe they're ripe there for me to go in blank as a blank slate at some point. So we'll see. Maybe we'll even cover them on this podcast.
Oh, fun.
I don't know why we would.
I don't know why we would. Seth.
They're the most watchable. What about
They're
you,
the
Carlee?
most watchable.
What have you changed on? Carly's going to eventually come around on Tenet.
Yeah, I fucking hate Tenet, dude. I hate it so much. I think a film that I am probably like, as you say, ripe to reevaluate is the Lord of the Rings trilogies. I just like think they're boring, and like I've sat through all of them because Aaron loves them, and I was like, okay, like I'm here for these. Everyone fucking loves these. I tried this when I was 10. Like I'll do this again. And like I just don't like them.
Not a fantasy person, really. So.
No, that's not true. But yeah,
I just want to chime in to say,
oh, you've inspired something in Tony. He's come out of the ether.
Oh no!
As a fellow Tenet hater, please stand strong. Do not reevaluate Tenet.
Great, thank you. Oh my God, Tony, thank you so much. I fucking hate that movie so much.
It goes up in my estimation every time I rewatch it. So I love it enough for both.
I feel
of us.
so vindicated. Especially because I feel like so many guys love Tenet, and I'm just like, okay.
Let's not gender this.
No, I don't want to.
Tony's
I don't want to.
No man's man. Let's just say.
I'm no woman's woman, to be honest.
All right, fair enough. Okay, what is the next one? Okay, your most unpopular movie opinion, which, could possibly overlap with some of the opinions you've mentioned already, but,
Right.
something that you might get accused of being crazy for thinking or getting arguments about.
You got some.
Oh, I've got plenty.
What's one?
Well, I'll give you one in the positive and one in the negative for fear of us just dragging this on longer and longer. But in the positive, I'm a huge fan of Clint Eastwood as a filmmaker, and particularly of his late period. I go resoundingly to bat for his 2018 film, The 1517 to Paris, which is a very strange, like quasi documentary, like recreation experiment that is sort of kind of overwhelmingly hated by critics and a lot of people online who think I'm insane for loving it. But I do think it's like I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's a really brilliant piece of filmmaking.
Does that extend to like, Gran Torino and The Mule? And
Gran Torino is one I don't love as much. I actually think his 2000s work is not as like thoughtful as his like later like 2010s and 2020 stuff. But I do love The Mule. I do love Cry Macho, Sully, Richard Jewell. I think are all fabulous, fabulous films. I also have a lot of, this is the one that actually gets me in the most trouble. I have a lot of love for Steven Spielberg's 2018 film, Ready Player One, and have really come around on that and started to become one of its staunchest defenders. So I may put more words to that and explain why at some later date. But I love that one a lot. And in the negative, I am frequently getting on fights on twitter.com if you follow me at all because of my just like outright contempt for the filmmaker Denis Villeneuve. I dislike basically everything he's ever done with the exception of his film Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal, which I think is maybe his best work. But I do not like the guy and it gets me in trouble quite a bit.
Boo, hiss. Send your hate mail to their Patreon.
That's the usual reaction. Yeah, don't get too mad at me. Don't go like review bombing us like the last time I said something.
Oh God.
Wow. Even Sicario?
Even Sicario.
Wow.
I got feelings about Sicario. Ooh, we can talk about those.
Oh boy. All right. Well, that's another episode, I guess.
Okay. I will also give one in the affirmative and one in the negative. I think that Paul Thomas Anderson is fine. Like, I just don't, he's fine. I think that Licorice Pizza is boring and incredibly self-indulgent and totally about vibes and not in a way that I connect with at all. I think he has some really fantastic films. I absolutely adore The Phantom Thread, or Phantom Thread, rather.
Phantom Thread.
I tend to do that. I add a preposition. Would I do that with Saw?
You add the to everything. The Saw.
I really adore Phantom Thread. I think it's beautiful. It's actually one of my favorite films. I love it. And I love with my whole heart Punch Drunk Love.
Great film.
It's stunning. And made me.
That's my favorite one.
I mean,
it's one
look
of mine
at
too.
it. Like, it's so good. But the rest of his films, they're fine.
Take it or leave it.
I'm like, he's whatever. The other thing that I will say in the affirmative, is that I think Speed Racer is a masterpiece, but I actually think one of the most remarkable films made by a Wachowski is The Matrix Resurrections. And I think it's like so fascinating and such a beautiful and important like coda to the trilogy and statement on like our relationship and expectations that we have of cinema and franchises and film and all those things. And I every time I go on and talk about how great that movie is, like people say really mean things to me. They also do when I talk about how much I love the movie Blonde, which I think is a masterpiece. That is another one that gets me in trouble all the time.
Wow. So your PTA answer, I was like cheering you on. That I feel exactly the same way.
Oh my God, great.
Look at that.
About Phantom Thread and Licorice Pizza.
I'm so happy.
And then the last two things you just said totally lost me. So now
that's
unpopular is back.
Okay,
Yeah,
well
I
that's
tend
good
to
to know
do that.
actually, because like there's a very strong and vocal contingent online that actually do really love Matrix Resurrections, but just as many people I think who were disappointed by it. So,
yeah, totally. Good to know.
Yeah, perfect. All right, and then our last real question is what your most unwatchable film would be, which, you could take it as something you just really hate or more in the spirit of something that is just, disturbing on a level beyond just being bad. But however you want to take that.
This is going to be one that's going to get people mad at me again, because this is also an unpopular opinion, but I hate with every fiber of my being Frank Darabont's The Shawshank Redemption.
Oh.
I find it to be cloying.
I think there are a lot of people that would agree with you.
I feel like there's people like really, really love that movie. I So, that's maybe like a weird answer to an unwatchable thing. It's not like it's anything that like is, reprehensible or frustrating to me in ways that I find like unnerving or dissuading. It's just a thing where like when it comes on, I have like a physical allergy to it. Like I can't. It has to change. I need to put something else on if it's ever on the television.
Throw on Anatomy of Hell to
Yeah, right.
get things comfortable again.
Absolutely. Yeah,
totally.
like mouthwash for me.
I think my most unwatchable movie that I don't think it's unwatchable at all, that I think everyone else thinks is unwatchable, is Virtuosity, the 1995 Russell Crowe, Denzel Washington vehicle. I fucking love it, and I think that it is one of Russell Crowe's best performances.
You don't do extremity horror very well, though. Like you can't watch like the Saw movies and stuff like that.
No, but I think that Virtuosity is a film that a lot of people would say is unwatchable.
Mayhaps.
And I don't think that it is. I'm just going to say that.
Boy, I wonder if never having never even heard of that is saying about it.
Yeah, I don't think you need to see it. I mean, I do, but like on record, I'll say I think it's fine if you don't.
Thank you.
That's such
You're
a
welcome.
90s like thriller title too.
It is.
Virtuosity.
It's
Oh, yeah.
so
Okay.
that.
All right, and our final long-standing debate on this podcast is
Oh, don't even do it.
whether Southland Tales is good or bad.
So I think I messaged you about this, Mark, and told you, just full disclosure, neither Carlee and I have seen Southland Tales. I've got the Arrow copy
That's the most popular.
I've got
Yeah.
the Arrow copy with the can cut like on our shelf. I just haven't pulled the trigger on. I even started the can cut one night, got like 45 minutes in, and I was like, it's not the time for this. I'm not in the headspace. I'm going to watch it later. So I haven't returned to it yet. But I am curious which of you loves it, which of you doesn't, and if the one who doesn't love it has seen both versions of the film.
Before you answer that, I'm going to answer with my request, which is, can each of you like just briefly pitch the movie?
Oh my God.
Help me
I
understand.
don't know.
Give me.
I can. I will do
Okay.
it.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, no. First, you have to guess who likes
My
it.
guess is that Seth, you enjoy it, and Mark does not.
For some reason, yeah, I think we both reek of those opinions.
The only way I can really sell it is all of Philip K. Dick's bibliography. Think Star Wars prequels. Think Matrix. Which is the Resurrections?
Just
Yes.
pandering at this point.
And then
Yeah.
particularly episode 2 of
You're
the
just
prequels.
naming all the worst movies I've ever seen.
Great.
Okay.
Those are the worst movies that Mark's ever seen.
Got it.
But if they aren't the worst movies you've ever seen, you might like Southland Tales quite a bit.
Fantastic.
Playing to our tune.
Sold.
Yeah, I have no pitch for it. I don't think either of us have. Well, I don't know. I've only seen the can cut. Have you seen the shorter one, Seth?
I've seen the shorter one.
Okay.
Wait, why do you hate it, Mark?
It's I think that it has a very like juvenile sense of humor that is never funny, and
That's the worst part.
and it is like an absolute like colossal just vomiting mess of storytelling in like every direction. And God help you if you haven't read the like 3 unpublished comic books that you have to have read for anything to make sense. And yeah, I'll leave it
enjoy
there.
drowning. Just enjoy drowning.
Yeah, and it is so
the sci-fi section of the bookstore. That's all it is.
I will make a solemn vow to you all that we will watch it sooner rather than later and report back to you all
Yes.
what we
Submit
do
your
about
votes.
how we feel.
Okay.
We will submit our votes.
Maybe we'll be split. We'll see.
We might be.
Well, ding ding.
So once again, thank you so much for all of your time and for this wonderful conversation. And I want to encourage everybody to check out Hit Factory, support them on Patreon. I also want to give appreciation to you two for the month of Patreon proceeds that you are giving to support the campus protests and for being so vocal about the genocide going on in Gaza. And it's refreshing to see people not afraid to use their platform to not mince words. about all that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
Very much appreciate that. Yeah.
The very least we can do.
We have nothing in our like we don't do this professionally, so it's not a thing that we need to or feel the need to like prevaricate or you know, kind of tiptoe around. So we're in full support of the protest movement and of an end to the genocide, and we'll continue to say so.
Well, not to end on that note, because we did have a good time with you guys, and
We did
hope
too.
that everybody checks out these movies if they sound like something you want to check out.
That's really what this is all about.
It's all about coming together. Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.